Humanity. That name conjures up a lot. Humanity is the premier trading power of the galaxy. If you want something, the Terrans will get it to you, and their ideal X-class super freighter is something to behold, able to hold more than 1 billion tons of raw materials and luxury with a crew full of Terrans. You are guaranteed that nothing will interfere with your goods. Their position 25,000 light-years from the galactic core meant that they were isolated from the disputes of the galactic conglomerate, but not too far enough that it would take 6 months for the ship to reach its destination. Instead, it takes just under a Terran month to get to the home of the galactic conglomerate. Plus, the Terrans said they were pacifists and would not interfere with galactic politics. This principle was tested when the Tit-Unk War started, and the Terrans traded with both sides, giving them food and water. They told the Galactic Council this was to ensure the survival of civilians, so we had researchers investigate the Terran military doctrine and found a rich history that ended abruptly 100 years before first contact with the war they called the War to End History. We discovered they found something within themselves during that war they swore to destroy. After the war, they forged a document that the new Terran government must follow when it came to war, and on the top of that list was the protection of civilians. This word was foreign to us. As once a country has begun a war, everyone is involved in the war, and for the Terrans to say that you cannot poison the water that factory workers drink so you can slow down production was a concept genuinely foreign. However, we let them be, as why stop them from practicing their pacifist ideology? When the Terrans saw the bombing of Ema by the Tit forces, they suddenly stopped all ships transporting goods to Tit territories and even turned around those already in transit. This act shook the Tit government, who immediately asked why the Terrans had stopped transporting vital aid. The Terrans stated they could not be complicit in the killing of civilians. The Tit were outraged at this, seeing the action as tantamount to a declaration of war. However, the Terrans were too far away for anyone to conceive of mustering an army to challenge the Terrans, so the galaxy watched as the Tit civilization collapsed into a brutal civil war, letting it happen. The Terrans, however, could not let the suffering endure even though they caused it. Unfortunately, the Tit public had the same opinion as the Tit government, and the Terrans' peace forces were pushed back by an angry mob of civilians. The Terrans realized after this that the rest of the galaxy does not think like them and thinks they're borderline crazy, so they accepted this fact and continued to trade with the core, but would no longer partake in supplying governments during a war. However, the Terrans did not see that enemies were beginning to see them as weak-minded and with their vast resources, easy pickings for anyone within range. Within range was the crucial part, as it took weeks for any fleet to travel across the needed space to get to the border of the Terran Federation, and even more time to get to Terra itself, so only 2 empires could do it, the Fava Empire or the District Empire. The District were neutral to the Terrans and being militaristic, fancied the Terrans' chances in battle. As they put it, you never unlearn the art of war. The Fava were much more opposed to the Terrans, and the two species had multiple close calls, mainly when super freighters were shot at for trespassing into Fava space. It started getting nasty for the Fava when one of their stars went supernova and destroyed a significant part of their breadbasket, so a famine began, and looking for food, the Fava started to sponsor attacks on super freighters to collect food and meals for the hungry. Most were peaceful hijackings that stole the super freighters and ran into Fava territory. Of course, the Fava denied that they were sponsoring the pirates and that the pirates were looking out for those they loved. The Terrans were suspicious and started to arm their super freighters lightly. This arming of cargo created a proxy war between the Terrans and the Fava, with only one side knowing it was in a proxy war. Then the Fava did something to piss the Terrans off royally. They massacred a crew overnight. The Fava were no longer harboring pirates but terrorists, so the Terrans demanded the immediate surrender of the pirates responsible and the commander of the pirate organization, to which the Fava acted dumb. They said they did not know what the Terrans were talking about, and that the pirates were not a cohesive group. The Terrans, displeased, told the Fava royals that if they could not hand over those responsible for the deaths of 578 Terran crew, then war would be declared. The Fava queen scoffed in the Terrans' face and agreed. You see, the Fava could not hand over those responsible, because they were all high-level commanders who were not meant to kill the Terran crew, but kinship is more robust than all, so the Fava had to protect them. Compared to the Terrans, the Fava fleets were up and running quickly because of the recent conflict the Fava had been in, with the first war fleets being sent out only 6 months after the war began. These fleets knew that the planets and solar system closest to the border would be more heavily armed, so they took a longer route and hoped that Terran scanners would miss them. When they reached the system of fails, the Fava caught the system entirely off guard, and with little defenses, the system was crushed but not destroyed. This attack was a statement to the humans: we can come at you anywhere, and we will beat you. Unfortunately, this backfired on the Fava, as the attack only seemed to add more fuel to the fire of humanity's rage. After the attack, a statement by a Terran diplomat after the Terrans first united was published in news organizations across the galaxy as a statement by the Terran leadership: may we hope that the giant of war may never awake, that after the millennia it's been chasing us, it has grown tired, may it only grumble and snore in its long sleep, we must strive to keep it within its slumber. One day it might once again walk this earth to spite us all. At first, most races were confused about what the original speaker was implying. The original speech was layered with metaphors that made it hard to decipher. Some people thought it was about a literal giant walking the earth. Some thought the address was about the Terran ability to make war. I, however, raised the point that this might be talking about Terrans simply waging war. My theory caught on as the claim of massive fleets moving within Terran space emerged. The intel was brushed off as the ships were only found to be super freighters moving mass amounts of steel. The Fava continued to make attacks with more resistance than the last. With the growing losses suffered by the attack fleet, the Fava commander decided to move to a more strategic position and claim victory. They boasted in front of the Galactic Council about how they had beaten the Terrans easily, and how little fight the Terrans had put up. After the speech, all eyes in the Galactic Council turned to the lowly Terran ambassador who was smirking. Then standing up, they began to use the same metaphor. As the speech presented 4 Terran months earlier, the giant cannot simply wake up and start fighting. They need to cook breakfast, get their gear on, and grab their weapons, and it is then, and only then, can the giant's fight truly begin. So the war is not over until we say it is, she said sternly. The Fava ambassador laughed, as if the Terran had just told the greatest joke in the world. The district seemed to have had an overconfidence in you, because you seem to have forgotten how war works. Or do I need to explain it to you, like you're my young? The Fava just spat. The Terran, not amused, stood up stern and began to speak with death in her bright blue eyes. A forge does not simply alight to the point where it can melt iron. No, it needs to be heated so the iron can melt. Sometimes you may place the iron in too early, and it does not melt instantly. You and your race are the Iron Ambassador, and sooner or later, you'll start to melt before walking out to silence. Little did we all know at the time, but things were moving within Terran space. Old designs and concepts getting built in factories that surrounded great gas giants. Hundreds of millions of beings were recruited to get ready for the great fight. Scientists concocted great weapons that could burn away a planet's atmosphere. Finally, an armada that spanned solar systems, waiting at the Terran borders like it was a wall about to fall. All this is kept secret and silent for the day it is activated. That day was January 25th on the Terran calendar. Sensors across the core picked up a significant movement within space, heading towards the Fava Empire. Closer sensors told the core that the campaign was so massive that space was moving because of the number of ships going faster than light, all of it converging on Fava space. 2 weeks would typically be enough to get some defenses up, but for armies of the Terran size there was only one option: pray to your God for mercy and accept your coming death. Foolishly, the Fava put up defenses on their border, hoping they could stand long enough to gather intel on what the Terran ships and weapons looked like, but they could not even do that. The outpost lasted just 15 galactic standard minutes between first contact with the Terrans and ceasing all communication. The pictures it sent back haunted the Fava leadership. The images showed a great mass of gray getting closer and closer before the feed was lost. The first solar system hit was the Gauge system. It stood longer than the defensive outposts, but not by a lot. 37 minutes lasted before all signals cut except for the deepest military bunkers. They survived the longest of the lot at 1 galactic standard day before the Terran military kicked down the door and cut the final communication from the system. In that time, they had taken out 3 other systems, and the Fava were increasingly getting worried because the Terran battering ram was headed straight for Jura Prime, the Fava home system. The good thing from the losses was that the Fava were getting more information about the Terran attack. First, the main front was the Fava nicknamed the Planet Killer. This charge was the front that would destroy everything in its path and lay the way to the capture front, which cleared the planets and made sure that the main front was well supplied with goods and ammunition. The big surprise was that Terrans used projectile weapons that can only be countered with thick armor. Unlike lasers, which a good enough shield will block, the Fava panicked to thicken the armor on their warships and move every military asset they could to the Jura Prime system to try and hold out in one last hurrah. But to the Fava's surprise, when the Terrans finally arrived at Jura Prime, they moved around it into neighboring systems. Thus real panic began as those in the know realized that the Terrans were going to perform an encirclement of the Jura Prime system. Every being in the system scrambled to make either a speedy exit or bunker down in readiness for a fight. Weeks passed, and the Terrans stayed outside the Jura Prime system before the Terran ambassador called a sudden emergency meeting of the galactic conglomerate. As you all know, the Terran Republic has been at war with the Fava Empire. We want to hold on to our promises and offer peace only if the Fava surrender unconditionally to the Terran forces. If our demands for peace are not met, we will destroy the entire Jura system, home to 58 billion Fava. Plus, with the Jura star going supernova once we are done, the death toll could exceed 100 billion and plunge what's left of the Fava Empire into turmoil. So does the Fava ambassador accept his surrender? The Terran spoke as she commanded the whole room. All eyes turned to where the Fava ambassador was meant to be sitting, but only an intern was there. "What happened to your ambassador?" the High Speaker asked. "He shot himself when we received the order for an emergency meeting, saying how this was the Terran backing us into a corner," the intern stuttered out. "Dear me, well intern, you are now the ambassador to your people, and thus you have to accept or decline the Terran's peace offer," the High Speaker said, saddened at the news. At this, the intern said okay before collapsing. Suddenly, the Fava's direct line to the leadership started to ring, as the Fava Queen was calling to accept the terms of the deal. So the great army surrounding Jura Prime retreated to the human territories, leaving only one message in its wake: "May we hope that the giant of war may never awake, for we all saw the might of the giant and the power it wields. May it only grumble and snore in its long sleep. For we must all strive to keep it asleep. One day, it might once again walk this earth to spite us all. We must learn from our mistakes so that the giant can rest again."